The 5 aspects of your story's plot, part 4. If you've been following along with my 5-part series on your story's plot, then you have already watched the first 3 videos: exposition, the rising action, and the climax. If you are just joining this series, I suggest you take the time and watch the first 3 videos before beginning this one. We are now at part 4 of my series on understanding the plot of your story, and we will be examining what takes place right after the climax, the falling action. Time for another of my little tales. A man died leaving behind 2 teenage sons. During the reading of the will, they discovered that the bulk of their father's estate would go to only one of them. The old man had always tried to teach his sons the value of competition, and that nothing comes without a challenge. So, the stipulation in his will made certain that his 2 sons would have to compete for their inheritance. They would have to take their horses and race from the small town where they lived to the city limits 3 miles away. But their father, being a bit of a trickster, put in a clause that stated that whoever horse came in second would win the estate. So, the next day, bright and early, the 2 brothers got on their horses and started off down the road. Since neither of them wanted to win and risk losing their inheritance, they rode their horses as slow as they could. By the middle of the next day, they had only traveled a distance of 1 mile. Having sat up on their horses for such a length of time, they decided to stop in at a local tavern for breakfast. While there, they got to talking to the pretty barmaid and explained their dilemma. She smiled and told them both something that had them running out of the tavern smiling. Today, I'll talk about the best way to come down from your climax into the falling action of your story. And at the end of this video, I'll tell you what the barmaid said to the brothers. Like the term rising action, falling action is pretty much as descriptive. It's when the action of your story descends back down. In the plot of your story, like I talked about in earlier videos, your climax is preceded by the rising action and then proceeded by the falling action. If you remember in my video about the rising action, I used a ladder with rungs on one side for climbing up, the side where you slowly ascend. This represents the rising action of your story. The top of your ladder, the highest point, represents the climax of your story. The other side of the ladder, equal in length and angle, without any rungs, the side you descend rapidly. This represents the falling action of your story. If you also remember from that same video, the main reason for the rising action is to arrive at the climax. Well, the main reason for the falling action is to move away from the climax and transition to the resolution, the ending. That's not to say there are not plots that go from the climax directly to the resolution, but I'll cover resolution in the final part of this series. On the one side of the climax, the rising action, everything builds to it, like tension and conflict. But on the other side of the climax, the falling action, everything decreases. The tension becomes less imperative, the conflict lessens, and your protagonist no longer aspires to achieve a particular goal. He has already reached it and can now begin to tie up any loose ends. If we go back to our example with the protagonist, Nicole, if you remember, after getting a call that her fiancé is with another woman in a motel room, She rushes there and is later found standing over his body with a gun. If this was just a simple cut and dry story, then the shooting of her fiance would be the climax, and the falling action would be her remorse for what she had done, or elation for seeing her own form of justice served. But since stories are rarely ever cut and dry, her standing over his dead body with a gun would just be a turn of events. What if she just happened to show up, seen his dead body, and picked up the gun? Maybe it was the other woman who murdered him right before she called our protagonist, Nicole, and told her where to find him. Maybe she also called the police. Maybe her actions facilitated their arrival in time to see Nicole standing over the body with the gun, resulting in her being charged with his murder. Nicole then spends the rest of the story trying to prove her innocence. Now, this sounds a little more like a normal crime story. So, if this were the case, then the climax would be when she is finally exonerated for the murder of her fiance and set free. The falling action would then strive to de escalate the tension and the conflict, but not eliminate either of them entirely just yet. And that's because part of the falling action's job is to tie up any loose ends, and a big loose end still left untied would be for Nicole to confront the woman who actually committed the murder and then framed her for it. You might be wondering, why isn't the time when Nicole finally confronts the woman the climax? Then the events follow would be the falling action. That's because your story is all about your protagonist. And when your protagonist has achieved her goal, and in this story, it is to be exonerated for the murder of her fiance, which occurs at the time of the climax, it is what follows that event that begins the falling action. Remember, your protagonist, Nicole, her goal, after being falsely imprisoned for a crime she hadn't committed, has always been to prove her innocence. Once she accomplished that, she has achieved the goal she set out for. But if her goal wasn't to be exonerated, but one of revenge against the woman who framed her, and being exonerated was just a means to achieving that revenge, her final confrontation with that woman would be the climax. The falling action would then be what takes place after our protagonist has dealt with that other woman. It's important to understand that because the falling action immediately follows the climax, there is nothing too substantial to your story that takes place between the climax and the falling action. In my video about the climax, I used the college girl held in the cellar as an example. I showed what that story would be like without a climax, which in that case would be the college girl not escaping but simply remaining in that cellar. Which also means, since the falling action always follows the climax, there would be no falling action in that story because there would be no need for one. Have you ever gone tobogganing? Imagine climbing up that hill, pulling your sled behind you as you make your way to the top. The climb is the rising action. Your goal is to reach the top so you can get onto your sled and slide down the other side. The top being the climax. But let's say after getting only part way up the hill, you become too tired to continue on, or your mother calls you home for dinner. So you simply turn around and walk back down, having never made it to the top. But since you never reached the top, the climax, there could be no sliding down the other side, no falling action. Because without making it to the top, there is no reason to come down. Likewise, without the climax, there just isn't any need for the falling action because there isn't any action to descend from. I started the previous video mentioning that when people hear the word climax, they tend to conjure up images of what takes place between two people. So let's get an image of that. Imagine you and your significant other are engaging in making love. From the moment you get into bed and begin kissing, this is the start of your rising action, and your goal from that moment forward is to reach your climax. Everything you both are trying to achieve is to reach that climax, the very height of this action. But let's say, for whatever reason, you stop. Your lunch break is over, or the kids come home, or your husband comes home early. Whatever the reason, you don't make it to your climax. And because you don't make it to your climax, that big explosion, there is no need for the falling action. There is no need for you to descend from that state of heightened euphoria because you never achieved it. But let's say you took an extended lunch, or you called out to the kids and told them there's a hot pizza on the kitchen counter and not to bother mommy when her door is closed. Or you spend the afternoon at his house instead of yours. Now you are able to have uninterrupted sex with your goal still being to reach your climax. When you do, after the big explosion, looking up at the ceiling, you are immediately experiencing the falling action as you quickly descend from the height of your lovemaking. If we made it to the climax in our earlier story, that would entail the college girl incapacitating her final captor, where she either rendered him unconscious or went all the way and killed him. Once she has beaten the last of her captors, the height of the tension is over. The climax has ended, and immediately the falling action begins. It's also important to understand that the falling action demonstrates the consequences of the climax and how your protagonist is affected. With the couple having sex, the woman, during the falling action, might begin to realize any guilt for her adulterous behavior. With the college girl, in her attempt to escape, if she had to kill any of her captors or suffered a major physical or mental injury, once she is safely outside of the house during the falling action, while the tension de escalates, although she would be happy and relieved to be safe, she would reflect on how her escape, the climax, affected her. If not for her captors, she would not have had to kill another human being. If not for her captors, she would not have cut open her leg escaping through the barbed wire window, resulting in a lifelong scar. This is also a good example of cause and effect. The cause being her capture, and the effect being what she was ultimately driven to because of it. Remember, the falling action is there to wrap up any loose ends for your protagonist. A scenario might be that after the college girl escapes, she hurries to the large park down the street, the place where she had earlier hidden her little sister. This is so the men wouldn't be able to find and capture her also. Finding and making sure she is okay is one of the loose ends that needed to be tied up during the falling action. In the case of the woman and her lover, the falling action being where she ties up some loose ends. One of those loose ends might be getting him out of the house before her children see him or her husband returns home. Ever heard the saying, whatever goes up must come back down? Like with pretty much anything in life, at a certain point, you have to stop ascending and then begin descending. If you've spent a considerable amount of time climbing a mountain or simply jumping up in the air At some point, you have to come back down. When you reach the top of the mountain, you have reached your goal and found your climax. Then you make your way back down. That walk back down in regard to your story is your falling action. When you jump into the air, however brief the experience, when you reach your highest point, that's your climax. Then you immediately begin to fall. In regard to your story, that's your falling action. So, whether it's climbing to the top of a hill or defeating your captors and making it to freedom or simply enjoying the height of your lovemaking, everything that follows is the falling action that brings you back down so that you are able to realize the peak of your intended goal as you descend from it. And now I'll tell you the ending of the story I call Don't Look a Gift Horse from Behind. Since neither one of the brothers were about to cross the finish line first and lose his inheritance, the race would never end. So the barmaid simply told them to grab his brother's horse and get it there first. Since the clause in their father's will said whoever horse crossed the finish line second would inherit his estate, he didn't say the owner of the horse had to be on it. Thanks for watching, and if you found anything that I said beneficial to you in any way, hit that subscribe button because you never know. My next video might just be helpful too.